Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. My name is Louisa and I help high achievers, entrepreneurs and coaches lift the lid on life and business so that they can live at their highest value. Each episode, we will bring you our favourite founders, CEOs and guest experts to share with you their insights and strategies to expand your wealth consciousness, your spiritual leadership and aligned business strategies. We know that living in alignment with your soul's mission is what fulfills you, and we are here to show you how to achieve this in an energetically aligned way. If you haven't already, be sure to claim your free abundance activation in the Akashic Records. Go to louisahavers.com/gift to unlock your abundance activation today. And if you'd like my support in having aligned success in life and business, then contact me at www.louisahavers.com and let's explore together if it's an aligned match. Get ready to live at your highest value and to expand into your next level of money as you elevate and receive more. You create more for others. Righty ho, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited to be welcoming the incredible Gina Gardiner to our conversation, to the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. A huge welcome, Gina.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so delighted that you are here and that everyone's going to be able to benefit from your wisdom because you really do know your stuff. So I'm going to share a little bit from your bio so people can start to understand why they need you in their life. The Gina Gardiner is a multiple #1 international best-selling author, motivational and radical change catalyst speaker, syndicated radio host, empowerment spiritual mentor, award-winning transformational leadership and media years experience. Gina is a master strategist helping individuals achieve happiness, success and fulfillment, and business leaders achieve sustained high levels of holistic profitable success. A huge welcome, Gina. I cannot wait to dive into our conversation today.
Me neither. So let's go for it.
Yes. Well, let's start. I'm going to bring you back to the kind of the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey. So what happened? How, because you've got a wealth of experience behind you in leadership. So take us on that journey. How did you get to be doing what you're doing today?
So briefly, I started off life as a teacher and found I was very good at it and was very quickly promoted to be the deputy head or deputy principal of a large school. And I was just 28. And then a whole series of circumstances happened. So I was promoted to be the catalyst for change. The school was doing reasonably well, but was very much in the dark ages. And I spent the first 6 months with my then head teacher, John Hughes, strategically planning what we were going to do. Went skiing in the February half term. In the UK, we have a week in February. And I love to ski, but I'd got a brand new pair of skis, and um, it was the thing then to have longer and longer skis. But I proceeded to wrap that extra 10 centimeters around my neck on a number of occasions that week. And I lost my confidence and decided on the last day I was just going to go and do some gentle skiing. I was a very competent skier. I met friends at lunchtime. They said, well, why don't you come with us? We found a brand new run. Beautiful day, went with them. And they turned the corner and it was pretty evident that this was not the 6-kilometer red run that they were proposing, but actually a black diamond run with 6-foot moguls. And anybody who doesn't know what a mogul is, it's where the snow has been carved out by the wind and so on. Skied the first third, fell, and then managed to get back to where they were, which was about halfway down the run. We were all sitting on a mogul, rather like a gnome sitting on a mushroom. Very hot day, and my mogul gave way, and I rotated, and I fell about 200 feet because there was nowhere to land. The one good thing about that is that by the time, with all the falls and the bit of skiing that I'd done, I was almost at the bottom of the run, and that was quite close to our hotel. And I was determined to get back to the hotel and not to have the blood wagon, although they all said, we should call an ambulance and all of that. Um, Travelled home the next day, in quite a state, really.
Mm.
And my mum took one look at me, and I was carted off to hospital. And I'd got a trapped nerve, and I'd got a concussion. To cut a very long story short, I got back to school, went skiing again with the children, irritated whatever had gone on, and then on the last day found that I was paralysed down one side.
Whoa.
Um, and so I didn't actually get back to school until late May. Um, and then I got to the summer holidays, limped there really because I was not right by any means, and thought I've got the whole holiday to recover. 8 days in, very early in the morning, I got a phone call, and it was from my head teacher's wife. She was hysterical. She'd found John Hughes had died overnight in bed. We found out later he'd had a huge heart attack. So the summer holiday was taken up with um, organising the funeral, letting the staff, the parents, the local authority know, and I was acting head. And I was appointed to be the permanent head in the January of 1984. Now I was 29, so very young. Didn't know what I didn't know, but was
Mm.
determined that the school was going to be successful and that children were going to find a safe and happy place to learn, and that I wanted to develop staff too. I'd worked for 2 dire heads. I'd learnt how not to, in graphic detail. And I was the head there for 20 years, just over 20 years. And in that time, the school won many, many awards and accolades. And also, I ran the school for the most part from a wheelchair. And although it didn't feel it always at the time, the huge gift in that was I couldn't physically get into the vast majority of my classrooms. And so I had to find a way of helping people take radical responsibility for their own performance and a shared responsibility for the team. It was highly successful. We were one of the first beacon schools. I shared the same principles with dozens of other schools and hundreds of other teachers, and it works. But I was working for externally to bring an income into school because our income was so bad. So I worked for the National College of Leadership as a trainer facilitator, at the London Institute as a trainer facilitator assessor. I became an Ofsted inspector, and I became a workforce reform advisor for the government. All of these one at a time, but you'll appreciate 20 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And that brought in an income for special needs and to keep us at cutting edge for technology. But I was working a 15, 16-hour day, and my health was deteriorating. And I was in 2004 given an ultimatum: stop what you're doing or you will be housebound. Now, I have to say to you, anybody who knows me well knows I've got a very low boredom threshold, and daytime television does not do it for me.
Mm.
So we're very late 2004. Well, what am I going to do? I've got all of this
Mm.
experience, all of this expertise. I'm not ready to stop. I've got to find a way of using it that doesn't abuse my body. So
Mm.
the first thing I did is I took myself across to do some research across a wide range of industries, looking at emerging leadership and the development of senior leaders to see, is it the same as it was in education? Well,
Mm.
the widgets might be different, but people aren't. And
Mm.
so I set up my first business, Gina Gardiner Associates, and I started to work with businesses, initially corporates and then later with SMEs mainly. Still always done the life coaching. I was a qualified coach before I left headship. Um, but ultimately, whether it's your life or whether it's leading people in work, it's the same principles because I believe passionately you have to lead yourself first before you can lead others effectively. So, sorry, that's a very long answer to a very short question.
No, no, thank you so much. There were so many points as you were sharing that really struck me with everything that you had experienced and how you touched on how you led yourself through some very challenging times. There were so many moments that you referenced there, and something you said around your teaching your team to take responsibility because which was the gift because well, as you said, it wasn't a gift at the time, but the hindsight was that the gift was in that being able to recognize you had to teach people to take responsibility. And I know you talk about radical responsibility. Tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean about that? And why is it so powerful?
How often have you heard people say, "Oh, he made me so angry," or "Oh, gets me going, so frustrated." The reality is that we are giving those people permission to do that. When you take radical responsibility, first of all, for your thoughts, the quality of your thoughts, and most people don't give those a second thought. 95% of our thoughts are habitual. They don't cross our conscious mind at all. If you think about your emotions and with how you manage your emotions and whether it's somebody else governing your emotions, how much your when you speak or when you act, you're doing it because you think somebody else thinks you should do that. You're conditioning.
Mhm.
When you take radical responsibility, then you're doing it because you know that you're doing it, being it, saying it, because it's the right thing for you. And when you do that, I'm not saying this is absolutely 100% because we're human, but it does mean that people are, you are, you are running your own agenda rather than other people or your conditioning, whether that's this lifetime or ancestral, is running you. And so instead of being in that habitual pattern, you are much more aware of your thoughts and therefore your emotions and your words and your actions. And you then really do have a choice because everything we do is a choice and every choice has consequences. But the challenge for most humans, a great deal of the time, is they're not consciously making that choice, they're drifting. And as a result, those consequences are often far more far-reaching than they would be if we did it consciously.
That is so true. So, so true. I love how you describe that and that everyone can take radical responsibility. One of the things that you were talking about, the habitual patterns that I think would be helpful to dive in deeper for people is thinking about those aspects with the habitual patterns because and I'm sure you see this, Gina, I certainly see this with my clients, is these blind spots that come up. So we've got these habits going on and then these blind spots that beautifully protect these habits so that we don't realize what we're doing. So we might think we're being self-aware about something, but actually there's another layer there. Does that make sense?
Well, I would say to you that having worked with you, I recognize that there are several layers here. The radical responsibility has to happen at a conscious level. But then there's lots of conditioning and lots of patterns that go on at a completely unconscious level. And I think that's where your work is so powerful in that you take the step that, I talk about taking radical responsibility to looking at, well, if there are patterns of things that are going on, what's your resistance? What are your blocks? And in my case, for the most part in our work together, I don't even get it at that level. It's hidden. So it's only when I say, well, what are the hidden blocks or the hidden resistance that I start to actually uncover what's really going on. And I think the more we are aware, the more we then have an opportunity to do something about it. Because if you carry on doing what you've always done, then you're always going to get the same results. And part of my work, and I know your work, is about helping people achieve a very different set of results, the ones that they consciously want rather than the ones that they are drawn into, rather like a beetle caught on a sticky pad. You're trying to move forward but you're constantly drawn back to that same sticky pad of your beliefs, the way in which you operate. But it's rather like an iceberg, I think. And it's, what's the conscious bit? But what you provide for people is then, well, now let's get at the bit under the water as well as the bit above the water.
Yes, it is the layers, isn't it? Because otherwise we can keep going back to those default set points. We have to get across all the layers to be able to, as you say, um, well, is it's bringing that awareness through to the conscious mind so that you can then do something about it, which is that's where you start to change your behavior, which
Yeah.
changes your results and your experience.
So if I can just say to you, you know, if you're listening to this and you find that you have arguments with people that you're close to, and that you find yourself having arguments, but you're not quite sure why, because somebody says something in that tone of voice with an edge, and you bite back, or they back to yours, that's triggering something old, and very often we then respond in a way that is growling at them, or rather than listening. And so often you hear, it's not what you say, it's the way in which you say it. And that's one of the things that triggers us into old behaviors, old patterns. But when you're conscious of it, you then have a choice. I can
Mm.
respond as I always do. So I'm reminded of one client who had a terrible relationship with her mum. And they just really were not getting on at all. Um, and I said to her, you know, rather than biting back when your mum is having a go at you, have you ever thought of saying, I know I irritate you, and give your mum a hug and say, but I do love you? And she tried it and found her mum was completely and utterly disarmed. There was no row, that they were able to diffuse the situation and then to have a calm conversation. Now, it's not going to work in every situation, but it's worth a try. And the same if you have one relationship after another that's disastrous, you're the common denominator. Have a look at how you're operating, because the likelihood is that you are using default patterns in your relationships.
So true. And it's that thing of if they're showing up, of course, that we can see the default patterns. Most often they show up, of course, in our familial relationships. And that's where people will start to kind of recognize the patterns. But whatever's going on there, how we do one thing is how we do everything. So it's going to be mirrored in some way in the workplace, in business. I used to joke with other senior managers when I used to work for social services saying, I feel you could see people running their parental patterns on you as a senior manager. If you were having to manage change, etc., you'd be like, I can literally, t- I could tell what someone's relationship like was at home with how they were interacting with me because of the projection and the transference that would be
Yeah.
putting onto me. I found it absolutely fascinating, and it enables you to have so much compassion when you have that awareness, so that you're not then doing that, like you're saying, that sort of falling into that being triggered by your own family patterns in the workplace. um this is really deep stuff, and I think, have you mentioned about having worked with leaders that perhaps weren't the best, and I would reflect too that, in that workplace where you're working with leaders who've got more development to do, let's put it that way, it can be very stressful to be working to them. So I'd love to hear more of your reflections on this in terms of, like, whether people working in corporate or working in SMEs, um, seeing themselves as freelancers. Everybody's a leader. Why do you think it's so important today for leaders to become more conscious? Because I know you talk about becoming a conscious leader.
I think, just before we go to that, to say one of the things I think for many people who the middle very often get squeezed because they are struggling to manage their bosses and they've got to manage a team below, and it's often those that get dumped on, and then they've got to find a way of working. And I think that when you take radical responsibility for yourself and you are very conscious and aware, you can actually start to respond differently to your boss in a way
Mm.
that then manages up. So this for me, it manages 360-degree, that but when you're managing yourself, you have got much more um, flexibility, many more choices in terms of how you're going to behave and develop the relationship. And as a result, the people I've worked with, wherever they are in the continuum of leadership, have found that by leading themselves, and being conscious and having some simple strategies, that helps. But in terms of um, the leadership, recognizing, um, why does it need to be conscious? what is it about leadership that is so important that we do that in a conscious way? And I think consciousness at so many levels, conscious in the fact that, getting out of the patterns of, you've always done it this way. But consciousness as a leader is much bigger than that for me. That the being
Mm.
conscious of your patterns is one thing. But I think for me, there's a hugely spiritual element to leading in an enlightened and a conscious way, which is around leading with integrity, with compassion, and with the courage to do what's right rather than what's easy necessarily or self serving. And you've only got to look at the quality of leadership around the world to know that there are too many leaders who are determined to be right and to be seen to be right, making everybody else wrong, that their egos are what's pushing things along. And I have this view that, as a leader, your ego should be put in under your pillow with your pajamas or your nightie in the morning, and you can reclaim it when you go back. Because when you are determined to be right and you are not conscious of the impact of your words, your behavior on other people, then you're dangerous as a leader. And so,
Mm.
at a most simplistic level, if you're throwing out orders or targets, and you're not conscious of how your staff, your team, who your treasure, your gold, how they are and what they're capable of, either you're going to dump on them and expect something from them which they're not capable of, which then they become disillusioned, they become disenfranchised, really, because they're demotivated, or you're missing potential that's bored and that wants to be doing more, but because you are too busy, you haven't noticed it, that treasure is being wasted. So there's all of that in terms of consciousness. But then the other thing is to be conscious of your inner wisdom, to really tune into your intuition, your inner wisdom, because in a business setting, that is important throughout. All of these are principles for life. So that it's not just business or life, but as a business person, it's so important. And if you look at, really successful, highly successful business people, they are now much more open about the fact that they tune into their intuition in order to know whether they've got the right data or whether um, they've got it from the right place. And I'm reminded, when I was a head, only once did I appoint somebody that the governors loved, but my inner voice was saying, "Don't do it." But there was a
Mm.
shortage of candidates at that time, and I did it, and it took us 6 months to get rid of her. And she was toxic to the staff, and she was awful as a teacher. She
Right.
should never I wouldn't employ her to clean lavatories, and that's nothing against lavatory cleaners. She should not have been anywhere near people, because she was so toxic in her way of being. And equally, on another occasion, when the governors thought that the one I wanted to appoint was too young and too inexperienced, they allowed me. By that time, I'd been ahead for a while, and they listened. And she was just amazing. And when we had an Ofsted inspection, they could not speak highly enough of her and what she'd done. And we were allowed formal disapplication from the literacy hour. And as far as I know, we're the only school in the country for that to happen. So
Wow.
having that connection with your inner wisdom, really important. And then the third layer is that connection with consciousness, with that higher power, whether you call it God or Christ or Muhammad or whoever. Be in tune with that higher power. And for me, that comes through your relationship with yourself and your inner wisdom. And more, I think, I've become aware that to be a great leader, to be successful, but in a holistic way, that we need to nurture and grow that connection.
I love what you're saying here, and I think there's going to be more and more people requiring this with the growth of AI, artificial intelligence. people are the difference that people are seeking is that spiritual connection, that connection to self, that connection to their higher self, their God, their universe, as you say, whatever language resonates with people for that connection to that higher power. I know that along your journey, you've had some incredible experiences that really have led you to embody this, Gina. And with what you're now leading and helping leaders to really start to have that connection and to have more confidence in their intuition, like you say, I think it is the most important thing. And I think more and more people are going to be absolutely craving this because of this. We've kind of juxtaposition with the artificial intelligence, and then what we can bring as these channels for these connections. As you're kind of reflecting on this, I'd love to know, what was like a pivotal moment for you to recognize the power of your intuition, along the way. Maybe there's an experience that you had on holiday, or I know there's one, and I'm just trying to remember the story because you've shared it with me before, in relation to recognizing this absolute kind of connection that you had. If Tell me if anything is jumping to mind.
So was it
Um,
Brazil or Egypt?
or tell both.
There have been things that had happened before in my life which I had just thought, I have no idea, I'm curious, I just want to explore. But I went to Brazil to a retreat, a spiritual sanctuary with a group of
Mm.
friends. And the actual place was only operating for 3 days a week, although you could go in and sit in the energy, and it had the most amazing energy. As I walked in, it felt as if I was walking into a big hug. But we were told to ask 3 questions, and we went and we were before the healer, and I was told, as this is Wednesday, and I was told to come back on the Friday, and I would have my intervention on the Friday. And so spent the rest of Wednesday as you do, and then Thursday we every whether you were having an intervention or not, you went in for the service in the morning. And there were probably about 800 people in the hall, and there were literally 2 or 3 thousands waiting for their to come in. I mean, an amazing sort of place. Um, and suddenly it there was this sort of fluttering at the front, and it was obviously something not normal. And then like somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and although by this time I could walk very short distances, I was in my wheelchair. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and beckoned for me to come, and I was suddenly in front of the healer. I'm thinking, I'm not supposed to be here till tomorrow. What's going on? Um, and I was then led into a room, and it was a meditation, all in Portuguese. I just sat in the energy, and then we were told that after our intervention to go back to our lodgings, no interaction with anybody for 24 hours. They could bring you food or drink, but no talking, no electronics, no reading, which would normally be very hard for me. As I say, I've got a low boredom threshold. Um, and everybody else that I'd spoken to who'd had an intervention came home and went into a deep sleep and woke up the next morning refreshed. I got to the room at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I tossed and turned for a couple of hours and thought, God, this is going to be a very a long time. And then I became aware of colours swirling around the room: gold, magenta, purple, turquoise, bright green. And I watched this room filled with this colour for hours. It was mesmerizing. And then as it got dark, and you have to the bedroom had no natural light. It had a door into a bathroom which had a small transom window, and the bathroom door was open. So there was a little bit of light coming through from the outside, but not much. It was quite gloomy. And as it went dark, so the colours disappeared. And then within a very short time, I was aware of a glow. So I got up thinking, I didn't think there was a light outside. I hadn't had a glow come through the bathroom window before, and I went into the bathroom, and the bathroom was pitch black. Got back into bed, thought, maybe the light on my wheelchair is making the glow," but the glow was considerable, and it took me a while to work out that the glow was me, and I was glowing like a glowworm, and this white
Wow.
ethereal light was emanating from me, and it went on for hours. And at 6 o'clock, when people started stirring in the lodgings, ready to go to the centre for 7 o'clock, so the glow very gently dissipated. And I was just wired, full of energy. I'd not slept, um, but I recognized that that glow was me. And from that, I just took the message that actually that we are all a light if we choose to be. And I think for I'd been given the space and the opportunity for that to happen. I wasn't expecting it, um, but my life changed at that point. And although I was spiritually curious before, I think my relationship with myself and my understanding of my capacity spiritually was significantly changed in that one day.
Wow, what an experience to have. I'm not surprised that had such an awakening impact
Yeah.
of really embodying this and being able to recognize that there's more going on than meets
Yes.
the eye.
Yeah.
You mentioned about Egypt as well. I would love for you
Right.
to share that one too, because I think from what you've shared with me is just such a pivotal moment along your journey in terms of how and why you now teach what you teach and help others to really have that awakening with their connection.
So I went for a week to do a cruise along the Nile, and interestingly, with the same group, some of them with the same group of people that I'd been to Brazil with. Um, and there were three incidents. The first is that we went to a sonne lumiere at the Temple of Isis. Now, Isis is the goddess of life and death, and particularly women and fertility. Um, it was night because it's a sonne lumiere, and each of the performances were done for a different language. And so ours was the last performance of the night in English, and there was a big two boats came back from the island because the temple is in an island in the middle of the Nile, full of very noisy French people. And when we went, there were just the 14 of us and our guide, 15, and we had the whole of the island to ourselves. And it was magical. We had the opportunity to enjoy the sonne lumiere, to actually sit in the energy, to do a meditation. As part of a Magdalene group is the group that I belong to. Um, and we came back and everybody was quiet. That in itself was a miracle. And got back to our boat. And none of us went and had a nightcap. We all went straight to bed. And the following morning, three women, including myself, discovered that they'd started a period. Now, you might say there's nothing unusual in that. Well, I had a very early menopause. I had my last period was at the age of 38, and we are now talking about 5 years ago, and I'm 71. And the
Wow.
other two were at least 10 years past the menopause. And we were all checked out when we got back. Doctors could find nothing to explain it other than we had been in the energy of Isis, mother god of Egypt. Another day, we went very early to the Valley of the Kings, and Ramesses II's temple is there. And um, 2 days of the year, the statue, which is right at the back of the temple, is bathed in sunlight. They've got the geometry such that that happens 2 days a year, on his birthday and on his crowning day. Now, although they've moved the temple because of they built a reservoir, they've managed to move it. They're just one day out, but it's still 2 days a year, and each day is just one day
Mm.
out. Wasn't that day when we went. And if you can imagine going into quite a narrow entrance, probably about 12 feet wide, and there's a corridor that's 12 feet wide right the way to the statues at the back. But if you go up a step, there are ante rooms all the way along both sides, and they're full of hieroglyphics. And each of those was used for ceremonial purposes when the temple was actually um, first built. It was like Romford Market. We are talking about hundreds of people jostling.
Oh,
It was really, really full. So we went all the way down the left side, fighting, waiting for somebody to come out so we could get in and have a look. Looked at the statues and then started our way back up to the entrance. And as we got to the third room along, it was full when we arrived. We went in there, and suddenly I, Vicky, and Nicola, who leads the group, um, we were there on our own. Nobody there. It was silent, and then we started to hear a thrumming, and the thrumming was regular, it was rhythmic, and then there was
mhm.
a swirling energy. We were standing, and actually, when it first happened, we both all sort of looked, and you could see that, "Can you hear it? Can you feel it?" And
Yeah.
we just held hands because that felt the right thing to do. I have no idea for how long. It felt like forever, and it felt like a second. Um,
Mm,
and then the energy stilled, the thrumming stopped, and within a minute of that, the room was full again. No
wow.
explanation. The third experience was on the way home. We flew from Hurghada, so it was a 4-hour journey, and our guide had said there's a really special temple that people don't go to because it's off the beaten path. If you leave an hour earlier, you can go, and there's a crypt there that's very, very special. And we all wanted to go, and we arrived. And in these very historic places, I couldn't use my wheelchair. I had somebody's arm, and I walked. And getting into the crypt was difficult. So if you imagine um, a, a wooden a ladder, and there's just enough space for you to squeeze in to go down the ladder, and then there's the crypt. And while we were there, I was so busy looking at the hieroglyphics, I didn't see the a bit of uneven stone, and I just went face first, uh, hurt my ankle, and was completely and utterly I was polaxed. Took me
Mm.
a while to get my breath, and it took quite a lot of shoving from the rear to get me back up the ladder. Not very elegant at all. And the others wanted to go and explore, and I said, "Look, I can't. My ankle was hurting.
Mm.
I'm just gonna go and sit quietly. I'll see you when you finish. Take your time. I'm very happy. I need to get my breath. I'm I've had it." And so I found a little sort of area, and I sat with my back to the wall, sat on the floor, and it became quiet. You could hear their voices disappearing in the distance. And then I became aware of um, the wall pulsating against my back. And it was like a heartbeat. And I just sat and enjoyed it. And then one of the guards came over, and he had a huge gun. And we'd been told, be careful because they can be a bit funny. And I thought, "Oh my goodness, what's going on? I'm on my own. God knows where the others are." It was a big sight. And he came up and he was smiling, and he started to pat his chest in time with the pulsation. He said, "You can hear it too, can't you?" He
Mm.
stood and I sat for ages and ages and ages. And then the others came back, and as they came back, he went, "Shh," and he motioned for them to sit, and they sat with their back to the wall, and they started to feel it too. So all I can say is, once again, I think I'd I'd gone to a different layer really. I'd gone my my sense of connection was different. I've always been curious. My mum used to call it nosy, but my curiosity about these things became ever more present. And so, constantly looking for opportunities to deepen that connection and to find that connection. So, in my garden, for example, in nature, I find it much easier to connect. Um,
Mm,
it shouldn't be that it's, that we are connected. It's not that we are finding a connection. And I think for me, that's the thing to help people recognize. We are connected. We just don't remember that we're connected. And when you allow that space and you get out of your own way, and I think that's the bit that many people find difficult, myself included, certainly it's getting easier, but there are times when I look back and think, you've done it again, you've got in your own way. That
mm.
connection is there for all of us. And I think when we as leaders, whether that's leading a family, an organization, a group of friends, a big conglomerate, when we start to create that remembrance of that connection, we open up the possibilities which are quite unlimited. And the normal rules of it's got to be done in a particular way, or you can't, you can't, those all go out of the window really, because you open yourself up to the miraculous. And I think what we've done is we've closed ourselves down to the miraculous rather than it's suddenly there. It's always been there. Now, have I got all of the answers? You know me well enough to know, no, I haven't. I'm on my journey, and what I'm doing is sharing with people. There are certain things which I believe are absolute. One is you have to do the deep dive work on yourself. And a lot of what I do is to help people do that, to have that loving connection with themselves, to deal with life in general, and to help them engage with themselves and with life in a different way. Um, but anybody who thinks I've got it all taped has got it all wrong. I haven't. I'm just a little bit, perhaps a little bit further on in my journey than other people. And so I'm able to illustrate the way I have done it, not to say it's your way, but to say you might like to try this, um, and then adapt it to be your way. But at least this is a starting point. Come and join me, and I will hold the space for you. And I can see the potential in you, even when you can't see it for yourself.
You're very gifted. I absolutely love this, Gina, so, so much. And I know you've created an incredible blueprint that you're generously giving our listeners. Do tell us all about that and what they can expect from it and where they need to download it. Because I would highly recommend that everyone downloads it. So tell us all the things about your free gift.
So I became more and more aware that developing that spiritual leadership for ourselves and then for others, illuminating the way for others, has become more and more imperative. Time is short. We're at a crossroads, I think, as a human race, and we need more people to be aware of their capacity as spiritual beings. And so, in fact, after discussion with you, decided that I was going to create a spiritual blueprint to help people in that initial, really, either creating a loving relationship for themselves or deepening an existing relationship with themselves. Because if you haven't got that, then everything else becomes very, very clunky and difficult. And so it started off, it was going to be a brochure, and then it started to be a leaflet, and now it's turned into something much bigger. And it's an opportunity to do an audit, really, of where you are, wherever you are, without judgment, to look at and ask yourself some questions so that you have a sense of where you are and where you next want to go. And so it looks at your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your inner wisdom. It looks at your capacity to remember that connection with consciousness and so much more. And it gives you the opportunity to see all of those in a constructive way. And then through that, I'm inviting people to a 5-day free masterclass so that we can explore that and look at it in terms of you specifically rather than at things at a very general level. And if people would like a copy, they simply email Gina at genuinely genuinely-u.com. That's Gina, Gina, at genuinely, and then a little dash hyphen you, the word, .com. Then we'll very happily send you the link to the blueprint.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so, so much. I've got the blueprint myself. I would highly recommend everybody gets it. You're very generous with what you share in there, and it's very in depth. So people will have huge, huge value from it. So thank you so much. That is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Gina, where can people find you? Just as we wrap up, are you
I'm
socials, websites, all the things?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You can email me, same email address, Gina at genuinely-u.com. I'm on YouTube. It's Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner. Love it if you could go and subscribe. Um, there are so many places. If you just Google me, you'll find me. I'm all over social media like a rash. And so you can find me there. I also have a radio show. The radio show is called Gina Gardiner and Friends. It's on a free app, Apple or Android, Brushwood Network Media, Brushwood all one word, Media Network. And if you go onto your app, you can download that for free. Or if you go to the website, brushwoodmedianetwork.com, I'm on there. I'm also on Gnostic TV, and you can find me there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll attach all the links that you've given us to the show notes as well, so that people can download them there too as well. Thank you so much, Gina, for sharing all your wisdom and for our conversation today, and sharing those inspirational stories of how you got to be where you are now and teaching and leading others. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you
Thank you for
very much.
being here.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. We hope that this has served you. We'd love to hear what inspired you today from our conversation. Do come and find me and Gina on social media and tag us in your conversation. We would love to carry on the conversation there. And until next time, we will see you all very, very soon. Lots and lots of love. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. And if you like what you've heard and want to know more, please go to louisahavers.com. We just appreciate you so much. So thank you for listening and hanging out with us. If there's anything that we can do for you, you can email us at louisa@louisahavers.com. Let my team know if you have any ideas for shows that you'd love to hear or topics you want me to talk about. Really looking